Hello everyone and welcome to Metagame Mastery. Today we continue our coverage of the Rivals of Ixalan previews with lots of new cards that are going to have interesting impacts on the world of Commander as well as others. So if you like what we're doing here, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get into the previews. First up, we have Trapjaw Tyrant. He is a 5-drop for 3 colorless, white, and a white. He is a 5/5 dinosaur with Enrage. Whenever Trapjaw Tyrant is dealt damage, exile target creature an opponent controls until Trapjaw Tyrant leaves the battlefield. Okay, so let's take a look at this guy. He is really good in my opinion. I love him in Limited. If you get a chance to draft him, play him. He is a bomb that your opponent's going to have a really hard time dealing with. In Commander, I think he's even better. And the reason I say that is because in Commander, you can put him in the right deck, right? You've got a repeatable Fiend Hunter effect on one card. We're looking at a value engine that's going to turn into 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, etc., until your opponent finds an answer. That's really strong. What he reminds me of is not so much Fiend Hunter, but Admonition Angel. The 6-drop, 6/6 Angel with flying that has a Fiend Hunter effect with landfall. Now, obviously, that's going to be a better fit in more decks, but in the Enraged specific dinosaur deck, anything that might be Boros, this has the ability to be triggered more frequently and more easily. And specifically, Jisath, Grimlock, maybe another one of the cards we're looking at later today. This card is going to be a great value engine for those decks. I really like it a lot. Silverclad for Rostodons. 7-drop, 5 colorless, red, 8/5 dinosaur with Enrage. Whenever Silverclad for Rostodons is dealt damage, each opponent sacks a permanent. So we're seeing this theme this set where they really went all in, just giving tons of great Enrage abilities on dinosaurs. And this one's great because in Commander, I'm not even going to talk about Standard. In Limited, he's still a bomb, but for the same reason any big dumb animal is. But in Commander, there's a lot of people who will play Indestructible, Shroud, Hexproof. Edict effects get around that. This guy's going to be a nightmare for Voltron decks. And the type of Naya type builds that you would typically see in Rage value engines in don't have access to, say, Grave Pact or Dictate of Erebos. This is a very suitable substitute. This deck is starting to look very versatile, and with cards like Court of Calling, Green Sun Zenith, Survival of the Fittest, it's going to be a great toolbox deck to really have control of the board. I'm really looking forward to what these cards are doing in EDH. Next up, we've got Deadeye Brawler. 4-drop, 3 colorless, blue 3/2 with Raid. When Deadeye Brawler enters the battlefield, if you attacked with a creature this turn, you may return target creature to its owner's hand. So, right out the gate, this card has very little application in Constructed. This is built strictly for Limited. In Limited, it's a little bit more cumbersome than the Mana War type effects you've seen in the past, because what you want to do with those effects is play them before your combat step so that you can remove pesky blockers, affect the board state, maybe rework the combat math to your own advantage. This only triggers after the combat step. Now, one might think that's a problem, but if you're playing the pirate deck if you've been paying attention to the previews, pirates are getting a lot of really evasive raid enablers. And at that point, you don't have to worry about the combat math because your opponent can't touch those creatures in combat anyways. So it's a great way to limit this to a very specific deck archetype, but at the same time make it very strong. Now, this isn't going to go into, say, a flicker deck like Brago, like many other Mana War type effects might have, but it still could see play in a really good tempo deck for Admiral Beckett Brass. Next up, we've got Dire Fleet Daredevil. 2 mana, 1 colorless and a red, 2/1 human pirate with first strike. When Dire Fleet Daredevil enters the battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You may cast this card this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Okay, so this card's really, really tricky. It's going to be really tricky to get use out of it in limited. I'm not sure that the standard environment can really support this, but what I am looking at specifically is, of course, EDH. And in EDH, it's always a good thing. It's good value to steal your opponent's big spells. Have them become something that you could take advantage of. This is a card that will see play not just in pirate tribal decks, but this will see play in Izzet decks, Storm decks. This is going to see a lot of play as a very versatile card where you can steal your opponent's big whammy late game. And in that regard, it's a good card. I see people getting a lot of value out of this. I think it's going to show up at your table quite a bit. Now we've got a transform card, Path of Metal. It is a 2-drop in Boros colors. That's red-white, legendary enchantment. When Path of Metal enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have first strike, double strike, vigilance, or haste. Whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have first strike, double strike, vigilance, and or haste, transform Path of Metal. It becomes Metzali, Tower of Triumph. It's a legendary land that taps for 1 mana of any color, or you could pay 1 colorless, 1 red, tap it, and it deals 2 damage to each opponent, or you could pay 2 colorless, 1 white, tap it, choose a creature at random that attack this turn, destroy that creature. So this one's going to take some work to set up. You're paying 2 mana to drop it, but you have to have 2 creatures with very specific keywords in order to trigger it, to transform the card. This really seems like a build around to me. It seems like it's a lot of work, honestly. I could see maybe a Knights deck, maybe Aurelia and Boros really getting some use out of this, because Aurelia has vigilance already on her and haste. And of course, Boros has those really good equipment synergies. So you can add these specific keywords to creatures that are already in play. That said, I don't think the payoff is enough. I've been a big fan of a lot of these transform cards for this set and the previous. And this one seems pretty underwhelming to me. I mean, we're getting the ability to pay 3 to deal exponential damage, 2 damage to each opponent that gets exponential value, or nix attacking creature at random. That feels pretty weak sauce, in my opinion. Even though it can't be countered, it would have to be a stifled ability. It still doesn't feel very good. So I'm going to say that I'm going to take a hard pass on this card. Slaughter of the Strong. 3 mana, 1 colorless, white, sorcery. Each opponent chooses any number of creatures he or she controls with a total power of 4 or less, then sacrifices all other creatures he or she controls. I really like this card. Now, I don't foresee this getting any standard play, because it puts your opponent in a position where they're going to be able to keep their best stuff. There's already better board wipes than standard. Will this see play in limited? Yeah, it'll see play in limited. It'll do fine in limited. So there's no reason not to draft this very early. It's a strong card. In Commander, this is freaking sweet. There's a deck archetype called Toughness Matters. You see it a lot with, say, Treefolk Tribal is a good example, or Defender Tribal is another great example. This is Cataclysm stapled onto Retribution of the Meek, and those are both really good cards in Commander right now. So the ability to get the best of both worlds for very reasonable cost in those decks is fantastic. If this is a 50-cent rare when the set comes out, I'm going to load up on a bunch of these, because I can think of at least 3 or 4 decks off the top of my head that this will slot right into. Next we have Release the Wind. It is 3 mana, 2 colorless, 1 blue instant. Exile target non-land permanent for as long as that card remains exiled. Its owner may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this is a cool card. It's a flicker effect, a little bit costly at 3 mana, but it gives you the control to choose when that creature comes back into play. You can save it from a board wipe, you can protect it from removal, you can even target your opponent's things, get rid of counters that are getting out of control, get rid of make a tempo play. And the fact that you get to put it back into play without paying its mana cost means that if it was cheated into play for whatever reason, it comes back into play fresh, and it has the ability for you to get additional value out of its ETB effects. It's a good card. I'm not sure it's worth making room for in, say, a Brago deck or Rune, but it's a solid choice. If you're looking for additional effects like this is going to do good work for you. Here we've got our Tyrael Flow. It's a 3-drop, 1 colorless, black sorcery. Each opponent discards 2 cards. Got that exponential value there. If you control a vampire, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So it's important to note that no matter how many opponents you have, you still only gain 2 life. And that's kind of what makes or breaks this card, in my opinion. Because if it was 3 mana, you force your opponents to discard a total of 6 cards. They lose a total of 6 life. You gain 6 life. That's a ton of value. But being able to mind rot all of your opponents in a vampire deck at the risk of putting yourself off curve for 2 life to each of them and only gaining 2 life, I don't feel like that does quite enough. If you were able to gain that much life, this would be knock it out of the park, fantastic commander card. But you'd really have to be dabbling in a Rakdos discard strategy as well as a vampire tribal build in order to make this really worth your while. So here's a neat card we have, Deadeye Brawler. 4 mana, 2 colorless, blue-black, 2/4 human pirate with Death Touch and Ascend. Whenever Deadeye Brawler deals combat damage to a player, if you have the City's Blessing, draw a card. And if you're not familiar with the set's mechanics, Ascend is if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. So this is kind of a neat riff on Shadow Mage Infiltrator. It's got the same color identity, costs a little bit more, but is also on a bigger body. He has Death Touch instead of Fear, and has the same ability to draw you a card when he connects with another player. That said, it's tied to the Ascend mechanic. All in all, this is pretty strong. I think you're going to see this in Limited. If a pirate deck ever happens to come up in Standard, obviously Hostage Taker will probably take this slot, right? It's the exact same cost. But that said, this is a sweet new tool for Pirate Tribal and Commander. I could see this going in a lot of just regular Dimir decks who are looking for value. Can you imagine Scarab God bringing this guy back out as a 4/4? I mean, the value engine on this thing is incredible. He's really good on offense because obviously, unless you have chump blockers that you're willing to spare, the Death Touch is going to make it so they're willing to just take the 2 damage, and therefore put you in a position to get card advantage. Whereas if you're playing from behind, you have the ability to hold him up as a blocker, and then he has the rattlesnake effect. They don't want to attack into you for fear of losing their best creature. So all in all, this is a really well-designed card. It's not overpowered, but at the same time, it's quite good. Here we've got Moment of Craving. It's 2 mana, 1 and a black, instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. You gain 2 life. So this is kind of a cute card. It's situational removal. Great and limited. That's all. Here we have Arch of Araska. It's a land card with Ascend. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you could pay 5 mana, tap it, draw a card, activate this ability only if you have City's Blessing. So this one's kind of neat. I don't think it's going to see any use outside of Commander, but there are definitely Commander decks that are hurting for additional card draw. And I'm thinking right now, mono white, mono red, mono green, all of which can get City's Blessing so fast. Whether it be elves, whether it be goblins, whether it be soldiers, they can definitely stack up those 10 permanents on the board. And granted, it's expensive. I mean, you're effectively paying 6 mana to continue drawing cards. Mono green can afford to do that. And when you're in, say, mono white or mono red, the ability to draw that card and keep it, not have to discard it immediately thereafter, is pretty strong. Now, there was a similar card that came out in Oath of the Gatewatch, which sees a lot of play, but that requires you to already be Hellbent. This doesn't have the same restriction. This requires you to have a board state. So I think it will have a home in those decks that are really hurting for that additional card advantage. I'm just going to tell you, as a personal rule, I'm always looking to have a minimum of 10 cards to draw cards in every one of my Commander decks, 10 cards of removal in every one of my Commander decks, and 10 cards of mana ramp in every one of my Commander decks. And that can be really tricky when you start getting into those monocolor decks or those colorless decks where the color pie can be very restrictive. And this gets past all that, so it's definitely going to have its uses. Here's an interesting one. We've got Azores Gateway. 2 mana, legendary artifact, pay 1 colorless, tap, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azores Gateway, you gain 5 life. Untap Azores Gateway and transform it. It becomes Sanctum of the Sun, legendary land, tap, add X mana of any one color for to your mana pool where X is your life total. Wow, that's a doozy. All right, let's unpack this. First off, you've got loot ability attached to it. That's not bad. Even if you're paying 1 mana into it every turn, looting is a good thing. Let's look at Baby Jace. Let's look at Merfolk Looter. Being able to see more of your deck is always a good thing. Now, it's not true card advantage. In fact, at the end of the day, you're going to have to be very selective about what you're removing in order for you to be able to flip this, which I assume is your ultimate goal. But it's not bad to just continue doing this regardless. Now, what I'm looking at here is we've got a bit of a pacing issue. You drop it on, say, turn 2, and you start tapping it turn 3 through 7. You've got to remove a land, easy peasy, and then hit CMCs 1 through 4. That's doable in any strategy. You're looking at an extra 5 cards from your deck, gaining 5 life, and then potentially having all the ramp you could possibly want. Now, here's the thing about that. We're getting a functional reprint of Tolarian Academy, right? We already have a functional reprint of Gaia's Cradle in Standard, and it's not even seeing play. It's seeing play in Modern, which is cool. It is a sweet card. Don't even get me started on EDH because, hallelujah. Oh my god. But this has the potential to do great things. I don't think it's wanted in Standard right now. Excuse me. That said, this thing's going to be a monster in Commander. I'm not going to compare this to cards like Top or Scroll Rack because it's not in the same league by way of card advantage. I'm not going to compare this to Gaia's Cradle, but the ability to potentially tap for 40 plus mana, that looks pretty good. And in games where you could potentially continue drawing off this to turn 7 and flip it, that feels pretty good. This feels like a very good fit in EDH. So keep an eye out for this card. I think this is going to do some work. Next up is a reprint. You probably know the card, Naturalize. This card's been reprinted into Oblivion. I remember when this card came out in Odyssey, and it blew everyone's minds. Now it's something everyone takes for granted, and they think it's just something green is entitled to in the color pie. 2 mana, 1 colorless, a green instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. It's basically a color shifted disenchant from good old alpha beta days. This is actually really important for Standard purposes because Mardu Vehicles has been sort of hanging on this last meta. It's been fading out, but there have been these hardcore loyalists. There's been so much artifact hate, And then you get something like Naturalize, which is just good quality artifact hate and another color, and it's just going to make it so much harder for that deck to continue. This also affects God Pharaoh's Gift, which is cool. So I think it's going to be a great sideboard card in Standard, and I love that they're bringing in these reprints for Standard. Next up, we've got another oldie but a goodie, Negate. 2 mana, 1 colorless, and a blue, instant, counter target non-creature spell. Great sideboard card. Sees play in competitive Commander. I especially love the art on this one. This thing is going to be sweet. If you've got this and say you're competitive commander deck. I've got a Niv Mizzet deck that consistently combos off about turn 5. I wouldn't mind picking up a foil of this because it's just going to look amazing. Here we've got Mutiny. 1 red mana sorcery. Target creature an opponent controls deals damage equal to its power to another target creature that player controls. It's a cute card. I like the flavor. It's super dependent on your opponent's board state. So I don't see this getting any play in constructed formats. If you're really hard up for removal in limited, this is going to be a fine card to play. Here's an interesting card. We've got Blood Sun. A little reference to Ye Olde Blood Moon. Just like Blood Moon, it is 3 casting cost, 2 colorless, and a red enchantment. When Blood Sun enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. That's not bad. All lands lose all abilities except mana abilities. That's different. And already everybody is looking at this as a way to power up lands that have drawbacks. And that's really interesting. Since this card has been previewed, Lotus Veil has gone up in value more than 500%. There's another card called Scorched Ruins that's gone up in value more than 700% because people are speculating and looking to brew with this card. I think one of the cool things about this is it nixes utility lands, those pesky Mazes of Ith, those dangerous Kessig Wolf runs. It nerfs Strip Mine. Oh, those repeatable Strip Mine combos. Put a stop to that. At the same time, it can power up, you know, those janky little sort of dual lands that come with everything but they have the drawback, enters the battlefield tapped. Those are removed. That text is removed while this is in play. You know those bounce lands? They don't bounce the lands anymore while this is in play. So many cards that had that additional disadvantage are suddenly much more viable with this card. That's pretty freaking neat, and it replaces itself. I like this card a lot. I can imagine brewing with this and really doing some neat things. Not only taking advantage of it with my own mana base, but using it to specifically interfere with my opponent's, non-spell shenanigans that they like to do. Oh, and forget about manlands. They're done. Resplendent Griffin. 3 mana, 1 colorless, white-blue, 2/2, creature griffin. Flying, ascend. Whenever Resplendent Griffin attacks, if you have the city's blessing, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so if you remember the last set, Azores was a color that had no support. There was no dedicated archetype in limited, and there were no cards printed with that specific color combination on them. It's kind of neat to see that we're getting a legendary creature and an uncommon in Azores for Rivals of Ixalan. It's still not enough. Don't play Azores in limited. If you get forced into it, oh, that's gonna hurt. I don't even see this seeing play anywhere. I can't think of any Griffin Tribal or flying deck that really needs this. It's a neat card. I mean, its potential value engine. Say you can hit Ascend right away on turn 4. You're attacking in with a 3/3 flying for 3. That passes the vanilla test. It becomes a 4/4 on turn 5 and continues to grow from there. That's value, but it's very magical Christmas land, and there's just not enough support in limited to really make this worth your while. On the other hand, we've got Raging Regisaur, 4 mana, 2 colorless, red-green, 4/4 dinosaur. Whenever Raging Regisaur attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So that's freaking sweet. I mean, it has the ability to ping out away chump blockers. You can get that additional damage in. It could effectively attack for 5. Or it's a Swiss Army knife of enraged triggers. I love this card. It meets the vanilla test, just being a 4/4 for 4. But on top of that, it's so versatile. It's so simple. It's a beautiful card. I love the repeatable ping effect that's attached to it. And yeah, I'm going to be playing this in limited. I'm going to be putting this in potential Jisath builds, Grimlock builds, or we've even got a guy coming up later here in the show that's could definitely make use of this as well. Sun-Collared Raptor. 2 mana, 1 colorless and a red, 1/2 dinosaur with trample. Bear with me. It has the ability pay 2 colorless and a red. Sun-Collared Raptor gets +3/+0 until end of turn. Okay, so paying 2 mana for a 1/2, even in red, doesn't feel very good. He has trample, so if, say, you attack with him on turn 3, dump all your mana into making him a 4/2 trample, that's still a lot of investment. The one possible upside for this card is that there's no limitations on when you can activate this ability or how often you can, like a Basking Rootwalla type of effect. So later in the game, you could potentially make him a 7/2, 10/2, etc., 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 right? Depending on how much mana you have to just dump into this thing. That's still not good enough for me. If you really need curve filler and limited, then it's a fine card. Otherwise, it's not really going to see any play. This has draft chaff written all over it. Speaking of, we have Sun-Crested Pteranodon. He's a 5-drop, 4 colorless and a white, 2/5 dinosaur with flying. Sun-Crested Pteranodon has vigilance as long as you control another dinosaur. So this is a pretty big step down from the 3/4 flying dinosaur that we got in Ixalan. He does have the potential to gain vigilance, which makes him an evasive attacker and a viable blocker. He's fine as curve filler if you really need something to round out your 5 spot in your limited deck. Otherwise, you'll be seeing this in little leftover piles after every draft. Hornswoggle comes out from the ring and attacks with the shillelagh. That being said, the card itself is a 3-drop, 2 colorless and a blue, instant, counter target creature spell. You create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So we basically have a remove soul that is also a treasure generator for purposes of getting City's Blessing. I mean, you have to leave up an extra mana in order to do it, but you get that mana back next turn for you to put towards whatever, so it kind of balances out. It's a fine card if you're looking to make some tempo plays or build some kind of a control deck for limited. It'll do fine for you. Otherwise, I don't see it getting a whole lot of use. Here he is, folks. He's Zakama, Primal Calamity. 9 freaking mana on this guy. 6 colorless. Red, green, white, Naya colors, 9/9, legendary creature, elder dinosaur, with vigilance, reach, trample. When Zakama enters the battlefield, if you cast it, untap all lands you control. He also has 3 mana abilities. First up, you could pay 2 colorless and a red. Zakama deals 3 damage to target creature. You could pay 2 colorless and a green, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or you could pay 2 colorless and a white to gain 3 life. Wow. That's a mouthful. This guy's sweet. Now, already people are talking about if this is going to take Jissa's place as the commander of choice for Dinosaur Tribal. And that makes sense why it was originally premiered on the Command Zone as their preview card. That's debatable. There's some very interesting points on both sides. Of course, Jissath is cheaper, has a more immediate impact on the board by being able to attack and potentially put more creatures in play along with him. Whereas Zakama has the neat ability that when he enters the battlefield, if he's cast, maybe from, say, the Command Zone, untap all lands you control. That includes anything you tap to pay for the Commander tax. So he's something that could see play more than once. How on earth you're getting enough mana to play him more than once? I mean, in many Commander groups, you will never get to play this guy. Ever. That's my main concern, honestly. When you've got a commander that costs this much mana, what are you going to do? You're going to spend the first 6 turns ramping? I mean, you're really not involved in the game much if you want to make this guy viable. That said, I mean, there's a lot of parity here. We've got a 3-color commander with 3 keywords, 3 mana abilities. He's a 9/9, 4/9. We've got a little square root thing going on here. His 3 mana abilities each cost 3 apiece, so that's a total of 9. So they're doing some cute things with numbers here. The idea is, of course, you're going to pay 9 mana to cast him. He blows the vanilla test out of the water. You untap all the lands you spent, or all the lands. Even if you played other cards this turn and somehow still have enough mana to cast this guy, you untap all lands. And then you have that mana to go ahead and dump into any combination of his abilities. If you want to lightning bolt creatures off the board, if you want to naturalize stuff, or just gain 9 life, you can go ahead and do that. Personally, I love the versatility he adds to the dinosaur decks, but at the same time, none of those abilities specifically kill my opponent. I gotta put in a lot of work to get a very big creature that only nixes certain creatures off the board. I mean, this isn't even an exile effect. We're talking about a format where Indestructible and Hexproof and Shroud run rampant. We're not getting exile effects. We're not getting damage to all creatures. We're not getting potential damage to a player. If this was a straight up lightning bolt effect on him, I might feel differently. Just he has the ability to enter the battlefield and then lightning bolt someone out of the game. That'd be freaking sweet. Of course, that'd be broken. They nerfed it. They dialed it back. I personally would be just fine with running this in my 99 and potentially hitting it off of a Jisath attack. Here we have Masterminds Acquisition. 4 mana, 2 colorless, black sorcery. Choose one, search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Or choose a card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand. First off, quick rules note, if you're playing in any kind of competitive format, when a card says that you get to pull a card from outside the game, it means something from your sideboard. So if it's not legal to be played in your sideboard, if it's not one of the 15 cards you've pre-selected going into the tournament, then you can't grab it with this card. In casual formats, your playgroup may allow you to be more flexible. It really depends on whether or not you abuse this, getting illegal cards, doing janky things that really wind up, detracting from the overall play experience. Because, say, in EDH, right now there is no official sideboard rule. That may change going into the future, but it's been well established ever since the Wish cycle. If you remember Living Wish, Burning Wish, etc., 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 they had a whole cycle of cards that let you tutor for cards outside of the game. It was ruled almost 20 years ago now that it's limited to the sideboard. Now, where does this see play? Okay, so this is effectively a Diabolic Edict with upside, right? You pay the exact same cost to get the exact same effect, only you could add your sideboard to the list. Diabolic Edict doesn't see a lot of play. Tutor effects are good, but you want to be able to tutor for the card and then be able to play it same turn. It's not worth taking a turn off in order to replace a card in your hand with something else in almost any format. Are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. First deck I think of, Kali of the Vast. I have a Kali of the Vast deck. I love it. Once she's in play, I basically don't even need my mana anymore. I'm just going to be dropping stuff from my hand directly into play for free every turn for the rest of the game. At least that's the goal of the deck. At that point, having a 4 mana spell that I can play immediately the turn after Kali enters play, find whatever option I need in order to just affect the board state the way I need to is a good card. Diabolic Edict is a good card in that deck. It's on flavor. This is going to be even better. So I think it does have a role to play, but it's not going to be as janky and broken as people are making it out to be. Here's a sweet card, Champion of Dusk. 5 mana, 3 colorless, black for a 4/4 Vampire Knight. When Champion of Dusk enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the number of vampires you control. Wow, this card's sweet. It's going to do just fine for you in limited. This could see play in the Vampire Tribal deck in Standard. There's definitely going to be one. It's almost certainly going to move in the direction of Orzhov. That said, I don't think they want to go that deep into black. That it's a very strong deck as it is. This guy's really going to shine, and I'm about to say it, in Commander. And before everyone goes rage crazy, oh, you could just throw anything at Edgar Markov, that is blatantly not true. You need to have a very specific strategy. There are many different directions you can go with vampires. This guy, on the other hand, takes advantage of his token generation and gives the deck much needed card draw. Now, of course, in Mardu colors, there's some very good card draw as it is, but it takes away from your aggressive creature plan. This makes it so you don't have to choose, and it triggers Eminence. So bare minimum, it's card advantage because you're playing 5 mana for a 4/4 that also gets you a 1/1 token, draws you 2 cards, and you lose 2 life. That's amazing value. Even if you played this on an empty board with Edgar in your command zone, this card's going to do work for you, and it's just fantastic. I'm going to say right now, Edgar decks are getting pushed this year. There's a reason why he's been banned in 1v1 formats, and that's usually something to pay attention to in multiplayer formats. Grab them while you can, folks. This card's sick. Next up, we've got Penniless Plunderer. 4 mana, 3 colorless and a black, 1/4 human pirate. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Okay, so this is kind of interesting for purposes of getting City's Blessing. It makes it so that your creatures can die, but it doesn't detract from your ability to reach that ascend total. Outside of, say, limited, where that might be significant, this is an interesting payoff in Aristocrats builds. I could see this in Orzhov decks, Golgari decks, being the additional push you need if you're not drawing into your Phyrexian arena, or you need to have the versatility of having colorless mana in addition to your colored mana for, say, an Ashnod's Altar effect. This is going to be an interesting combo piece in Aristocrats builds all over the place. It's got potential. I'm looking forward to using it in a variety of decks. Next we have Dinosaur Hunter, and he's just a funny card. 2 mana, 1 colorless and a black, 2/2, human pirate. Whenever Dinosaur Hunter deals damage to a dinosaur, destroy that creature. So he has basically selective death touch. He's a funny card. He'll be interesting curve filler in limited, fine sideboard card in limited. Otherwise, he'll never see play again. But I mean, it's just some funny flavor. Sealegs. 1 blue mana, enchant aura with flash. Enchant creature gets +2/+0 as long as it's a pirate. Otherwise, it gets -2/-0. So it's kind of a neat little combat trick for the pirate decks. It's nothing too good. It's just a fun little card that makes it so that your pirate can survive a combat. Buccaneers Bravado. 2 mana, 1 colorless, and a red instant. Choose 1. Target creature gets +1/+1 and gains first strike until end of turn. Or target pirate gets +1/+1 and gains double strike until end of turn. So this card's sweet. This card's freaking awesome. Pumping up your pirates and giving them double strike for 2 mana. That's a very good combat trick. And there are a lot of very good pirates that have abilities that trigger when they deal combat damage to a player. A good example being the Shadow Mage Infiltrator type card we looked at earlier in this show. This card's going to combo very well with your pirate tribal build, whether it be in limited or commander. Good card. Here we have a Donnas Climb. 3 mana, 1 colorless, green blue, legendary enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If that creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, transform Donnas Climb. It becomes Winged Temple of Araska. It's a legendary land. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You could pay 1 colorless, a green and a blue to tap it. Target creature you control gets flying and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. Okay, so this is a very interesting card. It's designed to take advantage of the +1/+1 counter theme, of course, in Merfolk, and becomes both mana ramp for Merfolk, which frankly it could use a little bit of, just for the fact that it wants to do so many neat combat tricks, and it has multiple mana dumps, especially from Ixalan. And then we've got the ability that it becomes a better berserk attached to a land with no downside. Of course, you got to put in the work. In Commander, this will see play when the Simic Merfolk deck eventually gets built. This could potentially see play in, say, an Atraxa build, where you're taking advantage of +1/+1 counters. Basically, anything where you're doing a lot with +1/+1 counters, this could fit very comfortably in there. But definitely the best home for this, the deck that needed this the most, is Azores Claw of Progress. This just adds extra gas, and it's a way for you to very quickly kill off an opponent. I mean, you could potentially transform this the turn it comes into play, and then immediately activate it and kill off an opponent that turn, just for 6 mana. It's fantastic. It's a good card in Azores Claw of Progress, and it's an instant staple. Next we have Weword Swordtooth. 3 mana, 5/5. You have my attention. Creature dinosaur. With Ascend, you may play an additional land each turn, and he can't attack or block unless you have City's Blessing. Wah, wah, wah. Okay, so he's kind of like the Amonkhet God cards. He kind of reminds me of Ronas the Indomitable. He also kind of reminds me of Oracle Moldiah. He's a little bit cheaper. He doesn't have the Future Sight type ability, where you can play with the top card of your deck revealed, but Oracle costs some dough, and I'm already looking at this as a budget alternative for Commander players. This card's pretty sweet. I like that you're getting the value of a 3 mana 5/5 for purposes of activating vehicles, for purposes of interacting with power and toughness effects, and if nothing else, if this was a 3 mana enchantment that says you could play an additional land each turn, it'd still be potentially viable in Commander, especially since it's one-sided. This only benefits you. So this is a very good card. And not to mention, that additional land that you're playing each turn counts towards your Ascend total. So it makes it easier for you to get the City's Blessing off this. This is a good value card. I like it. I like it not just for dinosaur builds, as an additional ramp card, because they definitely need the extra mana, but just in general, anything that takes advantage of having excess mana or landfall triggers, this is a great card. And here we have Twilight Prophet. 4 mana, 2 colorless, black, 2/4 vampire cleric with flying and ascend. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. Oh my god. Edgar's gonna marry this girl. Straight up. I don't foresee this seeing play anywhere outside of EDH. This is a good card, definitely for Edgar. obviously, Vampire Tribal. He creates tokens. That counts towards Ascend. Good, good, good. This has the potential to be a better Bob for Zombie Tribal. This has a potential to be a better Bob in basically any black deck. This card's freaking sweet. This card's so good. And once again, we go back to how Edgar needed additional card draw. Olivia Voldaren needed additional card draw. Any frickin' deck that has the ability to crank out creatures, especially tokens, can take advantage of this to get the additional life drain and card draw. And because it's Commander, you're going to have higher casting cost cards in your deck. You're going to get even bigger effects off of this Bob type effect. This is really good. This is really, really good. I'm a little bit out of breath here because of how good this is. If you see this, you snatch it up because the price on this sucker is going up fast. Well, that's it for today's coverage. We've got a lot of great new projects in the pipeline for you here. First, we're going to go do a limited format review of the remaining cards in Rivals of Ixalan, and then we are going to go into some deck building and deck tech series, as well as we have some how to play series coming down the pipeline. So if you enjoy our content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe.